This is the Roller Coaster Podcast, and I'm your host, Lucie Q. Life is a wild ride. It has twists and turns. It's scary, exciting, and downright fun. So throw your head back, arms in the air, and come along with me for the ride.
Life is like a roller coaster, baby, baby. I wanna ride.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Roller Coaster Podcast. I'm continuing on the journey of self-improvement, and this is the second in the series. Today I'm going to dive into vulnerability, and it's fitting that today, June 11th, is my 27th wedding anniversary, and it has taken me this long to be able to step into my own vulnerability. When I say vulnerability, what comes to mind? Weakness, danger, exposure? It's no wonder that so many of us find this a terrifying concept. Even in my darkest hours, I was never able to reach out and ask for help because I was scared of looking weak, being seen as a failure, and I didn't want people bad-mouthing me. How much do you open up? How much trust do you give? What do you show? And to who? It's not easy, but it's where your true self is hidden away. It's equal parts scary and liberating. But why? With vulnerability comes uncertainty. There is a risk in being vulnerable because you are trusting someone as you share your emotions and innermost thoughts. Let's look at things a little bit differently. Think about the people you love, whether it's your partner, your children, your parents, siblings, or your friends. Think about the energy it takes to love others unconditionally and the vulnerability you extend to those people without a second thought. Love is everything that vulnerability is. It's filled with risk and it's bursting with uncertainty. While your family may be less likely to drop you and walk away, there is a risk in maintaining vulnerable platonic and romantic relationships. As much as you love someone, there is always a risk that they won't love you back, that they won't love you as passionately as you love them, or that they will walk away. We've all experienced loss in our lives, the end of a friendship or a romantic breakup. You were so close to that person, yet it fell down around you. And whether you had your heart ripped out or things just faded away, there's hurt there. My family is creative. My husband is a creative director. Our oldest is an illustrator and filmmaker, and our youngest is in photography and video. And there's an element of vulnerability whenever they put their work on display. Whether it's presenting to a big client, posting an illustration or photo on social media, releasing your first podcast episode, or 100th, playing a song, or showing your artwork. You don't know how people will react. They might laugh. They might not like it. They might talk about you behind your back. You can't predict how others will see you and your work. There's a good chance you kept parts of you hidden or misrepresented who you were just so that someone would like you. Why? Because deep down, we're all afraid of being rejected for who we really are. So it becomes easier to paint a different picture of who we are and present that as fact. But you can't wear that mask forever. What makes you vulnerable is what makes you beautiful. Chasing perfectionism, attempting to be a strong person, those are excuses we hide behind in an attempt to avoid vulnerability. The biggest issue we have with vulnerability is our inability to numb particular emotions. When you try to shove fear, disappointment, or anxiety down and stuff it away, you also do the same with happiness, joy, and gratitude. For the last 2 decades, Dr. Brené Brown has been studying vulnerability, empathy, shame, and courage. She has written best-selling books on the subject and even has a Netflix special. But more importantly, she's identified certain myths of vulnerability, and they're an important piece of the puzzle. We see vulnerability as a weakness. Whatever you've believed in the past, whatever people try to tell you now, being vulnerable is not a weakness. It's human. Here's the thing. When someone else opens up to you, how do you feel? Pretty amazing, right? It feels great to know that someone trusts you enough to share a piece of themselves with you. It feels wonderful to know that they can open up and be honest with you. Yet, when it's your turn, you start to freak out. You don't see their vulnerability as a weakness. You only see it as a weakness for yourself. A lot of people have convinced themselves that not everyone experiences vulnerability. They just don't engage with it. They either aren't wired that way or refuse to engage. Either way, that's just false. We all do vulnerability. Human life, in and of itself, is vulnerable. Many people also confuse vulnerability with spilling secrets. We all have secrets, and the idea that we have to open up and share them? No, that's not what vulnerability is. It isn't a case of spilling your secrets or wearing them on your sleeve. It's the people who have earned the right to listen to those things that we share with. They have been vulnerable with us, and they have our trust. Vulnerability isn't a weakness. It's courage in action, and it's worth it. Without vulnerability, where would we be? There would be no creativity. There would be little to no innovation. It's the core of all of us. You can't opt out of uncertainty. You can't opt out of emotional exposure. You can't opt out of risk. The coping wall you spent a lifetime building is just one major life event from breaking down. Sometimes that's what it takes to allow you the strength to show your vulnerability. Perhaps you will find vulnerability in allowing those around you to find theirs. It's easy to doubt yourself, especially when you're putting yourself out there. You aren't showing weakness by putting it on the line. You're showing the world your true self, and that's as courageous as anything you can do. In order to be truly vulnerable, you have to first learn to accept yourself, all of you. That's probably the biggest challenge. It isn't just showing off the shiny bits. It's showing all of you, and it's difficult to do that when you're deeply uncomfortable with your flaws or imperfections. Before we can get into any steps on being more vulnerable, we need to talk about what's going to make it easier. It's easier when you love yourself. When you learn to accept yourself and love yourself, all of yourself, then you stop worrying so much about what others think. When you truly love yourself, you become much less terrified of rejection. That makes a place of openness much easier to step into. Vulnerability takes practice. It isn't a case of one and done. You won't make yourself vulnerable once and then suddenly find it easy to open up to everyone about everything. There are still going to be moments where it's a struggle. What's important to remember is that it takes practice, so don't give up. You're probably wondering why you should take all of these risks, put your heart on the line, potentially face rejection, or worse. Vulnerability brings many gifts. The opportunity to grow honest connections. You're released from the pressure of perfection, and you become an inspiration because others will find courage in your action. You get to uncover your unique self. Ultimately, you'll gain immeasurable rewards. So, where do you start? Start by accepting your worthiness, loving yourself, appreciating yourself, and figure out why you're so scared of being vulnerable. Your feelings are there to teach you something. They teach you more about yourself and your desires, And you can't tap into those feelings or those lessons until you drop your walls. Embrace vulnerability. Look at how much you keep to yourself. Are there reactions, feelings, or opinions that you hide and keep to yourself? You may have allowed fear to win for a long time, but it's time to close the chapter on fear and open the door to vulnerability. Share your hurt. Imagine you make yourself vulnerable and it results in pain or hurt. If you struggle with being vulnerable, then you may give in to the instinct to run and cope with your feelings and the fallout by yourself. That would be a mistake. Share your hurt and share often. You may believe that avoiding vulnerability helps to protect yourself, but in reality, it's harming you and ensuring you remain in a state of disappointment. It's scary, yes, but the alternative is even more terrifying. You're not protecting yourself by running from vulnerability. You're setting yourself up for a world of pain. Vulnerability is not a weakness. It takes courage. It's about earning, building, reinforcing, and demonstrating trust to the people closest to you. And while there are other ways to begin building trust, such as honoring your commitments, following through, being consistent, being respectful, and being supportive, there can be no greater way to build trust than through vulnerability. The things that you've bottled up aren't serving you. Releasing them isn't a weakness. You are enough as you are. It's time to open up. You never know what could happen. For all you know, you'll find contentment on the other side. Thank you for joining me today. Remember, your support of the roller coaster is always appreciated. If you can, leave a rating and review. It will help me reach more people. Join me next Friday as I continue this conversation and we explore creating healthy habits. Until then, I'm sending you my virtually distant hugs. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Roller Coaster Podcast. Want to chat or share your ideas about today's show? Pop me an email at hello@therollercoasterpodcast.com. Don't forget to connect with me on Facebook and Instagram at The Roller Coaster Podcast. Our theme song, Roller Coaster, was performed by The Lucky Setback. Audio editing by the one and only Jeff Quigley of Quigley Creative.
Life is like a roller coaster, baby, baby. I wanna ride, 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 ride. Life is like a roller coaster, baby.